Good evening, and we begin with a City News exclusive tonight. A woman so terrified that her son is going to be shot dead by police, she's already made his funeral plans. Shauna Hunt now with a story of devastating mental illness and a mother's lack of faith in the system, which she claims has failed them before.
He thinks he's walking with Jesus, or he is a Roman emperor. At one time, he wouldn't cut his nails because he thought he was a Rastafarian.
Giselle Russell is describing her 21-year-old son during one of his many psychotic episodes. Once a straight-A student, he now struggles with bipolar disorder, and she fears he could one day become a victim of police gunfire. The shooting death of Michael Elegon back in 2012 hit too close to home.
I mean, the police were fully aware that he had got out of that hospital and that he was in a hospital gown, and they shot him to the ground.
About a year ago, Giselle got a court order to have her son taken off the streets and put in hospital. His state so severe, she required the assistance of the Toronto Police Mobile Crisis Unit. She claims it took over an hour for officers to respond, and the ones who did had little experience. Were they properly trained to handle your son?
Absolutely not, especially the younger officer that was there, because they go in groups of two. And I feel for the officers that have to apprehend these individuals as well.
The situation was so traumatic, Giselle launched this formal complaint against Toronto police, outlining how she feels the system failed her and her sick son in a time of crisis.
My son has not yet died, but I've been there firsthand with the officers.
Giselle even took her strife to police headquarters last week, where police encounters with the mentally ill came under the microscope.
This is not a report that will gather dust. This is a report that will gather momentum.
Putting a psychiatric nurse in a mobile crisis unit in every police division with 24/7 availability are some of the 84 recommendations.
And that I think
but for this mother who fears her son's next psychotic break could be his last.
We've already made arrangements for his funeral and his resting place, and that is a very painful thing for a mother to do for a 21-year-old son.
This glossy report is simply not enough.
The system has failed us every step of the way. It's not only the police or the hospitals.
Giselle believes the lack of help and training is a province-wide problem, and she says the process of finding these services to help those with mental health issues is difficult and confusing.
I've been advocating for years on my own, not knowing who to turn to get help.
This mother, in a state of desperation, has been collecting reviews and inquests relating to mental health care in Ontario. Giselle Russell began this crusade 6 years ago when her teenage son started hallucinating.
He was sitting on a set of stairs and he was talking to himself and laughing, and that's when I knew something was really, really wrong.
Giselle says the system is broken, leaving families with nowhere to go.
It's extremely difficult to navigate the system to find the services that you require.
And when he goes into hospital, they just get him through this episode.
The crisis. And then they just return him. In fact, they'll give him a token to go home on the bus by himself.
Is this a one-off story, or is this happening all the time?
It's happening all the time. There's not nearly enough service to provide people with what they need when they're in crisis. There's just not the money to do it. It's very resource intensive.
The government loves to produce all of these lovely looking reports that cost an awful lot of money to produce.
And after years of hitting dead ends, Giselle says one more glossy report like this one released last week is the last thing she needs.
Probably in my lifetime they will not implement enough to save my son's life.
The police shootings of Michael Elegon, Rael Jardine Douglas, and Sylvia Klibben-Gaitis have all gone under the coroner's microscope. In 2013, 74 recommendations were made relating to police training, mobile crisis units, and funding for mental health care services.
This is a report that was done in 1988, and this is Building Community Support for People, a plan for mental health in Ontario.
Giselle says these recommendations have been redundant for decades.
We recognized this problem was about to spiral out of control, and we still have not done very much.
Giselle's son is now living in a group home with very little supervision. She knows his next psychotic breakdown is just a matter of time.
His life is probably going to be very short, and to be honest, since he's been 15, he hasn't had very much of a life anyways.
Giselle tells me she will continue lobbying all levels of government until she feels satisfied changes are being made. Shauna Hunt, City News.